We're seeing the rand coming back nicely after the pressure that we saw last week. Let's first perhaps get out of you a sense of the direction that you're looking for the rest of this week.
Good morning, Godfrey. Well, we have seen a bit of short covering in the rand, from the late Friday afternoon, and it's continued this morning. However, we still believe that the rand remains vulnerable over the medium term. So for this week, we're expecting a 714 range back up to that 735, 740 area. If we go through 714 to the downside, we could go as low as 707, but for us, that would be the absolute floor for the most part. We think that the rand, as I say, is probably going to weaken shortly again.
That sounds, Michael, like you're calling a bottom to the rand with that range there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're not going to see too much more downside potential. We of course have had some relief in terms of risk aversion. There has been some nice or welcome market developments on the Egypt front. And we saw a lot of risky assets actually rallying into the weekend. We saw the equity markets. We saw the dollar coming back a little bit. We saw commodity prices a bit firmer. And all of that has, of course, helped the rand. But, there's still underlying concerns facing the rand, and that is, of course, those capital inflows that have started to wane into South Africa. And our growth metrics, as another example, don't look good. And then if, of course, we look at the Reserve Bank, they have been accumulating more dollars in recent months, and we expect that to continue. So we by no means changing our view. We still believe the rand is going to weaken from here.
Yeah. Michael, how much of this is this a rand story rather than a US dollar story? I mean, you speak of risk aversion coming down, and you also speak of the events that have been happening in Egypt. But we have also been seeing at the same time the rand coming back a little bit against the euro.
It has. It's not just a dollar story. It's part of the reason. But I think the fact that the rand actually recovered against quite a number of currencies last week. Remember, rand remains the worst performing currency for the year to date. And last week we saw a bit of short covering against fellow commodity-based currencies and some of the other emerging market currencies as well. So clearly, a currency is not going to move in just one direction. There are going to be periods of profit taking, and I think that's what we see now. But it doesn't change the underlying theme and the trend, and that is a bearish one for the rand, we still believe.
Yeah, this week, of course, is inflation week. I mean, we've got inflation numbers coming out of here in South Africa. We also have, of course, inflation coming out of China, more importantly for the rand. But also for the rest of the continent, we do have numbers coming out of the likes of Zimbabwe and Zambia. Just beginning with China and South Africa, how much of a risk are the inflation numbers that are coming out this week for the currency?
I don't think it's going to be exceptionally market moving. I think in South Africa's case, interest rates have probably bottomed. I think the market is pretty much all on the same page in that regard. The question is, when do we start hiking? And if we look at the market, they're saying around 8 months. We don't believe we're going to get a hike for this year at all. But I think we've got quite a few months still worth of data that we're going to start accumulating and consolidating to see whether or not we're going to get an interest rate hike sooner rather than later. And I think, the next couple of prints aren't going to be material in shaping that view. Obviously, if the number comes out on the top side, then maybe those interest rate hike expectations will intensify. But I think it's going to be a while before we actually see a change in the current monetary stance in South Africa, even though the next move is probably going to be up. In China's case, I think we are definitely going to see more monetary tightening going forward, and of course we could see more expectations around that monetary tightening coming through if the inflation figures out of China this week prove to be quite buoyant.